So in our household, this has been a week of birthdays. It is our son Conley, our oldest son, turned 13 this week. And on Wednesday, on his birthday, Amy woke him up in the morning to get ready for school and said, "Good morning, Conley, happy birthday. Do you feel older?" He said, "No, do you?" Even our middle son, Asher, who's 10, got into the act, and he kept pulling me aside at odd moments this week and saying, "Dad, 2 more days till you're the parent of a teenager. Do you feel old?" And so it was a week of celebration, of remembering, and especially of storytelling, because at times like that, with birthdays and things like that, we tell stories. And often we tell the stories about who we've been, sort of our origin stories, the stories that tell us who we are. So, for example, one of the stories we told this week is about when Conley was born, and Amy was in labor all night, and I do mean all night. And my parents were at home waiting to hear from the hospital, lying in bed with the lights off, fully clothed, shoes on top of the covers, and finally said, we can be sleepless at the hospital as well as we can here. And that tells something about their excitement to have grandkids and just about this great gift. Or another story we told this week was about my sister, the older of my 2 sisters, who, when she was born at 10 pounds and something ounces, came out and was looking around the delivery room, holding her head up, sticking out her tongue, and smiling at everybody. And that says something about my sister. Just wait till you meet her. Or I think of another origin story, a birthday story I heard. A young woman that I greatly admire, one of my heroes, told the story about when she was adopted. And she talked about what it was like to be in the orphanage. She remembers the orphanage. And she remembers that day that her mom came and got her. And she came to the United States to live. And she tells that kind of birthday story, that kind of origin story, as a story of strength, of being chosen, of overpowering love, and above all else, of new life. A life that began that day. So our origin stories, the stories we tell at our birthdays and other moments, they remind us of who we've been, where we began perhaps, because who we were shapes who we are, and those two together help point us to where we are becoming and where we are going. And today, we are hearing our own birthday story, our own origin story. And this story begins, as so many of our stories together do, in the city of Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem was the living heart of the nation of Israel. It was the hub of faith and of people's prayers. It was that spot where God's presence had touched down on earth in the temple, in the holiest of holies, there in the center of the temple, touched down in smoke and fire. It's where everybody's hope gathered around and all their prayers centered there on this great city of Jerusalem. And on this particular day, it was a festival. A harvest festival when people from all over the known world gathered into this city. And so they just packed the marketplaces. Marketplaces just filled with people with clothes dyed with every hue, even some that you couldn't make here in Israel. And there were languages that interwove back and forth together, and cooking fires, and the smell from the stalls, the vendors there were carrying the smell of unfamiliar spices, curling around people as they gathered and rubbed shoulders with others who looked different. And in the middle of all of this were animals being driven by men shouting hard-syllabled words at them that sort of salted and peppered the whole gathering with other languages and that evoked other lands. And of course, in the middle of all of this were the kids, running and laughing, darting between people's legs, because what could be more exciting than a festival filled with people? And already we're reminded as this festival gets underway of another city, another time, much, much longer than this ago, another city called Babel. But in that city, it was all the people gathered into one spot with one language, but they had come for their own sake. They had come to make their own name known, and so they could be famous. And so for their own sake, they built this tower to scrape the sky for their own name's sake. And so God took and scattered their languages. And they could no longer communicate or understand one another. And when you can't communicate or understand one another, distrust grows. And so the people went, and no longer were they able to hear or know each other. And here in Jerusalem, as the people gathered for Pentecost, what we have is not the undoing, but the reversing of that curse. Because now people have gathered with all of their other languages into one city for the sake of God's name. They've gathered to give thanks to God for the harvest that He has given them. People gathered with all that wonderful variety of languages into one city for the sake of God's name. So it is the undoing or the reversing of Babel. Not the undoing, because God likes variety. God likes diversity. Just go walk around outside. Go out in the woods sometimes. And notice how amazing God's imagination is. God revels in His riotous imagination. And so there in the marketplace, people gathered with all their languages and their cultures and rubbing shoulders with people they cannot understand, all gathered around God's name, God's presence, to give thanks to God, when all of a sudden there's a sound. It starts out like a rumble, and then it may be like a sound of wind. And over there in the corner, the folks from Phrygia over there are starting to look around. They're craning their necks and looking. What is that sound? And over here in this corner, the folks from Egypt are noticing too, and they're looking not for the sound of the wind, but somebody is speaking a language they can understand. Familiar cadences of their own dialect they can understand. Well, I didn't know anybody else was coming. And here in the middle is a huge group from the island of Crete, and they're looking around too, saying, who is speaking my language that I can understand what they're saying about God? And all soon the whole marketplace is looking and wondering who else has come from home, looking and craning their necks, and all they see is a ragtag bunch of hillbillies. Folks from the hill country of Galilee. Well, it can't possibly be them. But no. They stand in the middle of the marketplace talking about God's amazing acts. And for the first time, the whole world can understand and can hear who God is. And you see, sisters and brothers, that's us. That is the moment when God created His church, so the whole world might know how much He loves the world. Enough, in fact, to send His Son. And then loves the world enough to establish His church, to carry that word out to all people, so that all can hear who He is and be introduced to His love and His mercy and His grace. And so in coming to know who God is and learning together how to look for His hands at work in our lives, we might come to trust Him and know Him and fall in love with Him. And to know and trust and love is what in the church we call faith. This is what it means to have faith in God, to know and trust and love. That's us. We are the Pentecost people that God created for the sake of the world. A community gathered together around His word, around His love, around His mercy, around bread and wine, and singing and dancing and praising, so that in us faith might grow, so that in us our trust might deepen, so that as we evoke and involve these environments that allow faith to grow, we might grow in trust. And then to take that word out to the world in our lives, our actions, and in our words. God created us on this day so that all may come to know His glory and His greatness. So today is our birthday. Today is the day that God is creating us by the gift of His Spirit, God's presence that moved into your life and right today is arriving within you. God who goes out with you from this place. God who indwells with you and is sharing life with you. God who loves you and will never leave you on your own. We are the people God created on this day, on this glorious day, this day of wonderful, blessed chaos and cacophony so long ago. God created us so that the whole world might come to know His love. Thanks be to God.